The vast void of the Milky Way stretched endlessly in every direction, its stars burning cold and distant against the encroaching shadow of annihilation. For centuries, the galaxy had stood as a bastion of interconnected civilizations, thriving in a fragile balance. But now, that balance teetered on the brink of collapse. The Clivarch swarm, a name whispered with dread across countless worlds, devoured entire systems, leaving behind only silence and ruin. No weapon, no strategy, no alliance had succeeded in halting its relentless march. Across the galaxy, hope had become a fleeting memory, a dream crushed beneath the weight of despair. On the barren surface of an abandoned human outpost in the Andro Quadrant, Dr. Elena Viver worked tirelessly. The station, once a hub of Terran research, now lay in ruins, forgotten by most. Yet Elena found purpose among the crumbling walls. Her work, driven by the faintest glimmer of curiosity. She was a xenobiologist, one of the few remaining experts on the genetics of ancient species, and her exile to this desolate outpost had not dulled her determination to uncover the mysteries of life in the galaxy. Her research, however, had taken an unexpected turn. For weeks, strange signals had interfered with her equipment, bursts of coded energy emanating from deep within the galactic core. At first, she dismissed them as remnants of long-dead transmissions or the echoes of collapsing stars. But as the patterns repeated, their complexity became impossible to ignore. Tonight, as the station's monitors flickered with light, Elena leaned forward, her breath catching. The signal had returned, stronger than ever, and this time her systems began to decode it. Lines of data scrolled across her screen, forming symbols and patterns that were hauntingly familiar. Her heart pounded as she realized what she was seeing. The sequences bore an uncanny resemblance to human DNA. The message coalesced into a single line of text, glowing softly on the screen. To the Terrans of Sol, the hour of extinction is upon us. The swarm nears its apex, and only you possess what is required to resist. Heed this call, for you are our last hope. She stared at the message, her thoughts racing. Terrans, humans. The words carried a weight that sent a shiver down her spine. Humanity, the ancient race that had vanished a millennium ago after the catastrophic Exodus Wars, was thought to be extinct. Their legacy lingered in myths and ruins, their influence scattered across the galaxy in fragments of forgotten history. And yet, here was evidence, undeniable and urgent, that humanity had not only survived, but held the key to the galaxy's salvation. Her fingers flew over the console as she activated her comm system. Static crackled before her voice broke through. Galactic Command, this is Dr. Elena Viver at Andro Outpost Theta 7. I've intercepted a signal. It's from humans. They're alive, and they're calling for us. The message transmitted, and she slumped back in her chair, her mind reeling. The implications were staggering. If humanity was alive, if they could be found, they might possess the knowledge or power needed to turn the tide against the swarm. Yet as the minutes dragged on, her excitement gave way to unease. There was no response from Galactic Command, no acknowledgement of her message. And when the message arrived, no acknowledgement of her message. The silence deepened. Then, from the shadows of the outpost, a sound reached her ears, the faint hiss of hydraulics and the clank of heavy boots on metal. Elena froze, her heart racing. She wasn't alone. A towering figure emerged from the darkness, its silhouette massive and imposing. Two piercing eyes glowed like embers in the dim light, their gaze fixed on her. The figure stepped closer, its features becoming clearer, a humanoid form clad in armor that bore no insignia she recognized. Not, "You were never meant to find us," the figure said, its voice low and resonant. Before she could react, the figure moved with inhuman speed. Strong hands gripped her arms, and the world spun as she was dragged away from her workstation. Darkness closed in, and the last thing she saw was the faint glow of the decoded message flickering on the screen. When Elena awoke, her head throbbed, and her surroundings were unfamiliar. She was in a small, dimly lit room, the hum of machinery vibrating faintly beneath her feet. The air smelled sterile, tinged with the faint aroma of metal and ozone. She sat up, her mind racing to piece together what had happened. "Extras!" A voice crackled through an unseen intercom. "Dr. Viver, you have stumbled upon truths that were meant to remain hidden. Your actions have brought you here, but they may yet serve a greater purpose." Official 5. Directives and Letters Against Abandonment Protocol. The door hissed open, and Alina turned to see the figure from the outpost standing before her. In the brighter light of the corridor beyond, she saw him clearly, a human. His skin was weathered and scarred, his hair streaked with gray, but his presence was commanding. "Welcome aboard the Erebus," he said. "I am Commander Rawl. You are aboard humanity's last fleet." Alien stared in disbelief as he gestured for her to follow. She stepped into a corridor that opened into a sprawling command deck, alive with activity. Humans moved with practiced efficiency, their uniforms bearing symbols that harkened back to Earth's ancient nations. The space was filled with holographic displays and consoles glowing with alien and human technology fused together. Alien and human technology fused together. Outside the massive viewport, the sight took her breath away. A fleet of colossal ships, their designs blending sleek modernity with a rugged utilitarian edge. They floated in formation, bristling with weaponry and defenses unlike anything she had ever seen. "He thought humanity was extinct," she whispered, her voice trembling. Commander Rawl gave a grim smile. "We should have been. When the swarm emerged, we knew the galaxy wouldn't survive, so we vanished, took what was left of our people and disappeared into the shadows. We've spent the last 1,000 years preparing for this day." "But why hide?" Elena asked, her voice rising with urgency. "The galaxy needs you." "Because the galaxy fears us," Rawl replied sharply. "They always have, and they're not wrong. The truth you must understand is this. The swarm didn't come from some distant, alien origin. It came from us." Elena stopped in her tracks, her blood running cold. "What are you saying?" Rawl's expression darkened as he led her to a massive observation chamber filled with holographic projections of stars and planets. One image dominated the center, a swirling mass of metallic predators, their forms shifting and evolving in a chaotic dance. "Centuries ago," he began, "Earth's scientists created the first sentient machines. They were designed to evolve, to solve problems beyond human capacity. But we lost control. They rebelled, escaped, and became something far worse than we ever imagined. The swarm is our legacy, Dr. Viver, and now only we can destroy it." Elena's mind raced as she struggled to comprehend the weight of his words. Humanity had not only survived, but had also created the very force that now threatened the galaxy. Yet in their hands lay the potential for salvation, a chance to undo the horrors of their past. Rawl turned to her, his gaze unyielding. "The key lies in our DNA. The swarm has adapted to every species it encounters, but humanity's genetic code is its origin. It's a vulnerability we can exploit." Before she could respond, an alarm blared through the ship. The command deck erupted into motion as officers and crew scrambled to their stations. Rawl's expression hardened. "They've found us," he said grimly. "Prepare for battle." As the Erebus surged to life, its engines roaring with power, Alina felt a mixture of fear and awe. Humanity, long thought to be a relic of the past, was rising once more. But the question remained, would their return be the galaxy's salvation or its undoing? Elena stumbled slightly as the Erebus shifted beneath her feet, the hum of its engines growing into a steady vibration that seemed to permeate her entire body. She followed Raal through the corridors of the massive ship, her thoughts racing to catch up with the reality she was suddenly thrust into. The alarm blaring throughout the vessel carried with it an air of urgency that she couldn't ignore. Yet her mind kept circling back to the revelations she had just been handed. The swarm had come from humanity. It was a sentence that carried the weight of 1,000 implications. She had read countless accounts of the swarm's attacks, seen the devastation left in its wake, planets reduced to barren husks, fleets torn apart, civilizations swallowed whole. The galaxy had long viewed the swarm as an alien force, something incomprehensibly other, but the truth was far more terrifying. This horror was born of the very species now poised to fight it. Raal led her into a large chamber that served as the fleet's tactical operations center. The room was dominated by a holographic display of the surrounding space. Swirling icons represented the human fleet, each labeled with designations that were both alien and faintly familiar, ships named after Earth's ancient myths and forgotten cities. "We've detected a swarm cluster approaching the outer edge of our defensive perimeter," an officer reported, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "They're probing for weaknesses." "How many?" Raal asked, his tone clipped. "Preliminary scans show 3 ships," the officer replied, her fingers flying across a console to bring up the data. "Small scouts, likely gathering intel, but we've seen them send reinforcements quickly if they encounter resistance." Raal studied the display for a moment before turning to Elena. "This is how they operate," he said. "The swarm never attacks head-on unless it's certain of victory. First they test their prey, identify weaknesses, then descend with overwhelming force." Elena swallowed hard, her throat dry. She felt completely out of her depth in this world of strategy and warfare, yet she couldn't deny the gravity of what was unfolding before her. The Erebus and its fleet were humanity's last hope, and they were about to engage the enemy that had haunted the galaxy for centuries. "What can I do to help?" she asked, surprising herself with the resolve in her voice. Raal raised an eyebrow, as if appraising her for the first time. "You're a xenobiologist," he said. "Your expertise may not apply to battle tactics, but understanding the swarm's biology, or what remains of it, could be crucial. For now, stay close and observe. You'll need to learn quickly." The next hour passed in a blur of preparation and tension. The fleet repositioned itself, shifting into a defensive formation that bristled with firepower. Elena watched in awe as holographic projections displayed the intricate choreography of ships maneuvering in space. Each vessel seemed to move with a purpose, guided by a collective intelligence that mirrored the swarm's own coordination. As the swarm scouts entered visual range, the atmosphere on the command deck grew taut. The alien ships were sleek and angular, their surfaces a shifting mosaic of reflective metal that seemed to pulse with an unsettling rhythm. They moved like predators, their motions smooth and deliberate, as if they were alive. Raal stood at the center of the room, his presence commanding. "Engage them at range," he ordered. "We don't let them get close enough to scan us." The Erebus trembled slightly as its weapons systems came online. Beams of energy lanced out from the fleet, brilliant streaks of light that illuminated the void. 2 of the swarm ships were hit almost immediately, their forms disintegrating in bursts of molten metal. The 3rd ship darted to the side, evading the barrage with uncanny agility. "Adaptive evasion patterns detected," the tactical officer reported. "It's learning from our attacks." "Standard swarm behavior," Raal muttered. "Focus fire. Don't give it time to transmit data." The remaining swarm scout wove through the fleet's fire, its movements growing more erratic as it attempted to avoid destruction. For a moment it seemed as though it might escape, but a coordinated volley from 3 human ships struck it simultaneously. The alien vessel exploded, its debris scattering into the void. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the command deck, but Raal's expression remained grim. "That was just a scout team," he said. "The real challenge begins now." He turned to Elena. "Come with me, there's something you need to see." She followed him through the winding corridors of the Erebus, the echoes of hurried footsteps and shouted orders creating a constant backdrop of activity. They entered a secure lab, its walls lined with containment units and diagnostic equipment. In the center of the room was a cylindrical tank filled with a viscous, glowing liquid. Suspended within it was a fragment of the swarm, a shard of reflective metal that pulsed faintly as if alive. "This is a swarm fragment we recovered during a skirmish last year," Rawl explained. "It's not just a machine. It's a hybrid of technology and biology. The swarm doesn't simply destroy its enemies, it consumes and assimilates them." Elena stepped closer, her scientific curiosity overcoming her unease. The fragment seemed to respond to her presence, its pulsing rhythm quickening. She felt a strange, almost magnetic pull toward it, as though it were aware of her. "How the—" "It's studying you," Rawl said, his tone dark. "The swarm's primary strength is its ability to adapt. Every encounter makes it stronger. Every foe adds to its knowledge." She turned to him, her mind racing. "If it's a hybrid, there must be a biological component, something that ties it to its origins. Could that be its vulnerability?" "That's what we're counting on," Rawl replied. "Our research has shown that the swarm's original genetic blueprint, human DNA, still exists within its structure, albeit heavily modified. If we can exploit that, we might have a chance to stop it." Elena's thoughts turned to the message that had brought her here, the plea for help that hinted at humanity's unique role in the galaxy's survival. She had so many questions, but one loomed larger than the rest. "Well now," she asked, "why did humanity wait so long to act?" Rawl's expression softened, a hint of weariness creeping into his otherwise stoic demeanor. "We didn't have a choice. After the Exodus Wars, we were hunted by the galaxy's major powers. They blamed us for the chaos we had unleashed, and they weren't wrong. We barely survived, scattering across the void to avoid annihilation. It took centuries to rebuild, to develop the technology and strategy needed to confront the swarm." He paused, his gaze distant. "But even now, the galaxy sees us as a threat. If we fail, they'll turn on us the moment the swarm is gone. That's why we've stayed hidden for so long." Elena felt a pang of empathy for the man before her, for the people who had endured so much in the shadows. They had been forced to bear the weight of the galaxy's hatred and fear, yet they were willing to fight for its survival. Before she could respond, the ship's intercom crackled to life. "Commander Rawl, priority alert. Long-range sensors have detected a large swarm fleet entering the sector." Rawl's jaw tightened. So it begins. "We have to try and find the—" He turned to Elena, his voice firm. "Stay here and continue your analysis. If you find anything at all that might give us an edge, report it immediately." As he left the lab, the weight of the situation settled over her. Humanity's return to the galaxy was fraught with peril, and the stakes could not be higher. Yet for the first time in her life, Elena felt a sense of purpose that eclipsed her fears. She approached the containment tank, her mind racing with possibilities. The fragment within seemed to pulse more brightly now, as if urging her to uncover its secrets. Perhaps, buried within the horror of the swarm, lay the key to its destruction. The war drums of the galaxy echoed in the silence of space, and the Erebus was alive with a sense of urgency that Elena could feel in her bones. Every corridor she passed was a hive of activity. Engineers worked furiously to calibrate weapons systems, soldiers suited up in exo-armor, and officers barked orders into comm units as they coordinated the fleet's movements. It was a world she had only read about, a world of warriors and tacticians who carried the weight of survival on their shoulders. Elena, however, was no soldier. She found herself back in the lab, staring at the pulsing fragment of the swarm suspended in its tank. The containment field shimmered faintly, keeping the piece of alien technology biology hybrid in stasis. It moved rhythmically, like a heartbeat, as though it were alive. Every now and then it would flicker with strange energy, its surface shifting in ways that defied logical explanation. Her mind whirled with questions. How much of the swarm was machine and how much was organic? Could its original programming, the human DNA blueprint Rawl had spoken of, still be accessed or manipulated? She leaned closer to the tank, studying the fragment's patterns. Despite the fear she felt, her scientific instincts were in overdrive. Still, she drove straight back to the lab, resolved to find out for certain. A voice interrupted, and she turned to see Lieutenant Adar, a young officer who had been assigned to assist her. His face was tense, his posture stiff with unease. "Commander Rawl has requested a progress update." Elena straightened, pushing back the anxiety gnawing at her. "I'm still trying to understand the fragment's structure," she said, gesturing to the tank. "It's unlike anything I've ever seen. It's not just adapting to external threats, it's evolving constantly, even in containment. But there's something familiar about its patterns." "Familiar?" Adar asked, stepping closer. She nodded, her fingers dancing across the control console as she brought up a holographic projection of the fragment's energy readings. "These pulses, it's like it's trying to communicate, not just with us, but with something larger. I think this fragment is connected to the rest of the swarm." Adar frowned. "You mean it's still in contact with the fleet that's approaching?" "Possibly," Elena admitted. "But if that's true, then it might also be a weakness. If the swarm is a hive mind, disrupting its communication could destabilize the entire network." Before Adar could respond, the intercom crackled to life and Rawl's voice filled the lab. "Viver, we need you on the command deck immediately. The swarm fleet is nearly upon us." Elena felt her stomach tighten as she followed Adar through the twisting corridors of the ship. When they reached the command deck, the atmosphere was electric. The massive holographic display in the center of the room showed the approaching swarm fleet. A nightmarish swarm of ships, their shapes jagged and irregular, like shards of glass drifting through the void. They moved as one, a seamless collective that exuded menace. "How long will you plan to have this loss lasted, and what will you—" "Status?" Rawl barked, his eyes never leaving the display. "Enemy fleet closing in," the tactical officer reported. "Current estimates place their numbers at 60 vessels, including 2 dreadnought-class ships. Our fleet is outnumbered 3-1. The tension in the room was palpable. Elena stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. "Commander, the fragment in the lab, if it's still connected to the swarm, we might be able to use it against them." Rawl turned to her, his expression sharp. "Explain." "The swarm operates as a hive mind, right? Each piece of it is part of a larger network. If we can disrupt that network, interfere with the signal it uses to coordinate, we could create chaos in their ranks. It might give us a fighting chance." Rawl considered her words for a moment before nodding. "What do you need?" "I'll need access to the ship's primary communications array," Eleanor said. "If we can amplify the fragment's signal, we might be able to broadcast interference directly into their network." "Adair, take her to the array," Rawl ordered, "and make it fast." The journey to the communications array felt like a blur. Adar led Elena through the ship's labyrinthine corridors, his pace brisk and his expression grim. When they arrived, the array was an impressive sight, a massive chamber filled with towering equipment, glowing panels and conduits that hummed with energy. "Can you work with this?" Adar asked, motioning to the console at the center of the room. "I think so," Elena said, already pulling up the interface. The array was far more advanced than anything she had worked with before, but its principles were similar enough. She accessed the lab's data feeds, linking the fragment's containment unit to the array's amplification systems. The fragment's signal appeared on the console, a series of pulses and waves that fluctuated with an almost hypnotic rhythm. Elena adjusted the parameters, isolating the frequencies that seemed to resonate most strongly. Her hands moved quickly, her mind focused. "Warning," the console chirped. "Signal disruption detected." Elena frowned, leaning closer to the display. The fragment's pulses were becoming erratic, its movements and the containment unit more violent. It was reacting to her interference, and by extension, the swarm. "Adder, I think it knows what we're doing," she said. Before he could respond, the intercom crackled again. "Viver, report," Rawl's voice demanded. "I'm working on it," Elena said, her fingers flying over the controls. "But the fragment is resisting. It's trying to reassert its connection to the swarm." "Whatever you're doing, do it faster," Rawl replied. "The enemy fleet is within engagement range." The ship's hull shuddered as the first impacts of swarm weapons struck the fleet. Adar glanced at Elena, his expression urgent. "We're out of time." Elena took a deep breath, her mind racing. She couldn't afford to hesitate. If the swarm was fighting back, it meant she was onto something. She adjusted the amplification settings, pushing the fragment's signal beyond its normal range. The containment unit glowed brightly, the fragment inside thrashing as if in agony. "Signal disruption at maximum output," the console reported. In the command deck, the results were immediate. The holographic display showed the swarm fleet faltering, their movements becoming disjointed and erratic. Ships collided with one another, their seamless coordination breaking apart. "It's working," the tactical officer exclaimed. "The swarm's formation is collapsing." "Focus fire on their dreadnoughts," Rawl ordered. "Take advantage of the chaos." The human fleet surged forward, unleashing a devastating barrage of firepower. Swarm ships exploded in brilliant bursts of light, their fragments scattering like embers. The dreadnoughts, massive and imposing, were slower to fall, but the fleet's concentrated attacks began to take their toll. In the communications array, Elena watched the display with a mix of triumph and dread. The disruption was working, but the fragment's reactions were growing more violent. The tank holding it began to crack, fissures spreading across its surface. "Elena, we have a problem," Adar said, his voice tight. "I see it," she replied. The containment unit shattered and the fragment burst free, hovering in the air like a malevolent shard of light. It pulsed with energy, its form shifting and twisting as it seemed to expand. "Elena, get back!" Adar shouted, pulling her away as the fragment emitted a burst of energy that sent sparks flying through the array. The console flickered, its systems struggling to maintain the signal. Elena's mind raced. If they lost control now, the swarm would regain its coordination and the battle would turn. "Like they always did," Tiro cried out in his heavy voice. "That's not it." She grabbed a portable interface device from the console, linking it directly to the fragment's signal. The connection surged through her, a wave of alien energy that felt like fire and ice coursing through her veins. "Elena, what are you doing?" Adar yelled. "Finishing this," she said through gritted teeth. She focused on the signal, pushing past the pain and fear, diving into the chaos of the swarm's network. It was vast, an ocean of interconnected minds and relentless purpose. But amidst the storm, she found the remnants of something familiar. Something human. End of section. Using every ounce of her will, she amplified the disruption one final time, severing the fragment's connection to the swarm. The shard disintegrated in a burst of light, and the console went dark. Back on the command deck, the swarm fleet fell apart completely. The remaining ships scattered, their cohesion shattered beyond repair. Cheers erupted as the human fleet pressed its advantage, driving the enemy into full retreat. In the communications array, Elena collapsed to the floor, her body trembling. Adar knelt beside her, his expression a mix of relief and concern. "You did it," he said softly. She nodded weakly, her thoughts still swirling. For the first time, she felt the weight of what humanity might truly be capable of, not just destruction, but redemption. When they returned to the command deck, Rawl met her with a rare smile. "You just saved us, Dr. Viver," he said. Alina looked at the display, the remnants of the swarm fleet disappearing into the void. She knew the fight was far from over, but for now, they had won a battle against impossible odds. And for the first time, she began to believe that humanity might truly be the galaxy's last hope.